Dragon Sisters is an action RPG in the form of a side-scrolling beat-em-up. It sees you having the choice of one of two characters, who each have their own distinct advantages and cons. One of them utilizes kicks, whilst the other focuses on hand moves, and getting to grips with their individual movesets is vital to taking on the hordes of enemies that come your way. Most of them are robots, which are armed with axes, ray guns, and flamethrowers that add a nice amount of variety. Except for the bosses, regular enemies won't attack unless you're standing still, so the main aim of the gameplay is to constantly stay on the move and link your string of combos together to bring down each threat that comes your way. In order to inflict significant amounts of damage, you need to perform combos which end with a special attack. Performing a special attack expends a shell, which you can replenish at any time, but when you do, you will be standing still for a few seconds. During that time, you're open to attacks, and if your character is hit, you are stunned for about a second or two, making them open to even more attacks. This reload mechanic is at the core of the game. When you destroy an enemy, they leave behind floating glowing spheres for you to collect. Some of these spheres are of green variety, which replenish your health, but most of the spheres are red, which give you something known as soul points at the end of each level. These points are essentially XP that can be spent on 3 different things: abilities, combos, and special missions. This aspect alone adds a serious amount of replay value to the game, as unlocking all of the combos and extra moves will take a few playthroughs. If you've exhausted all of the other beat-em-ups on the PS2, Dragon Sisters is well worth checking out. At the time of its release, the squad-based shooter genre had seen a sudden increase in popularity, with the likes of SOCOM, Conflict Desert Storm, and Ghost Recon stealing the limelight. IO Interactive decided to release their take in the form of Freedom Fighters. It saw you taking up the fight as Chris, a local New York plumber who soon finds himself caught up in the action. It's up to him and various individuals you find and recruit throughout the city to push back the invaders and ultimately save it from total destruction. What makes this aspect quite unique is that throughout the course of the campaign, you'll slowly start to see subtle changes to the city itself, which helps to make it feel like a believable environment. From various weather effects and destructible objects, making your way through the city never gets repetitive in a visual sense. When it comes to gameplay though, this is where Freedom Fighters truly comes into its own. As I mentioned, it's a team-based shooter, so you can expect to have a band of characters at your command, which really opens up a ton of different strategies for the player to explore. From balls out, guns blazing to the more measured, stealthy approach, the game caters to how the player wants to play thanks to an incredible amount of items and weapons that make all of the different approaches possible. The icing on the cake is that controlling your team members is an absolute breeze. Commanding them to take cover or ordering them to fire in advance is a simple process that never bogs down the minute-to-minute gunplay. If you never played it or are simply looking for a new action game to give a go on the PlayStation 2, Freedom Fighters will not disappoint. When it comes to shooters, the PlayStation 2 was home to many incredible titles such as Raiden, R-Type, and Gradius, which all provided some of the most explosive action on the PS2. As with most consoles though, many games fly under the radar, and Steel Dragon EX is one that never got a fair shake. First off, there's actually 2 games included on the disc. You get the first in the series, which feels like a sort of carbon copy of Raiden, but it manages to make itself feel quite distinct. The main attraction, however, is the second game, which benefits from being specifically intended for the console, and takes full advantage of the 3D capabilities under the hood. As the player, you get to choose from a selection of ships and pilots, which all offer up their own form of firing, from bullets to missiles or lasers. The pilots, on the other hand, serve a different purpose, and allow you to perform a series of special attacks. Some of the abilities just simply clear the screen of enemies, whereas others fire wide lasers or missiles that when used correctly turns each enemy into a large amount of collectible stars. Now these stars have 2 purposes. Firstly, they add to your bonus points at the end of each stage, so collecting them is essential for those chasing high scores. But perhaps most importantly, collecting them by the bucket load rewards you with extra lives. And because stars can be produced even by setting off a bomb during a boss encounter, you can actually find yourself in the position of coming out of a level with more lives than you went in with. With 2 full games to jump into, Steel Dragon EX offers up a serious amount of replay value. Both of the games manage to play quite differently, and mastering them will no doubt take some time, so if you're a fan of the genre, this one is a bit of a no-brainer. Berserk is an incredible Japanese manga filled with a deep and complex story of conflict, religion, loyalty and betrayal. It spawned a decent 25-episode animated series, a mediocre Dreamcast game, and eventually made its way to the PlayStation 2. Now the story closely follows the source material but does offer up some unique content such as original bosses, as well as a few side stories that help flesh out the narrative. You take up the fight as Guts, a tough-as-nails swordsman who sets out to take his former commander Griffith down. Now I won't go into the story too much as I'd end up being here all day, but with that said, the narrative is easily one of the best aspects of the game. When it comes to gameplay, it takes on a hack and slash approach to the action, which sees the player possessing a range of skills and special moves that help quell the never-ending waves of enemies. Adding to the mix are a couple of support characters, which can also help out when you're in a tight spot. You've got Puck, who acts as a healer, and Serpico, who can summon magic to attack, to name a couple. But what takes the combat to the next level though is the way you accumulate experience points and spend them. For every enemy you take down, you'll receive a small amount which can be used on upgrading various aspects of your character and the sword itself. From increased health to shortening reload times, there's plenty of ways to cater to your style of play. Add to this the various attachments for Guts' sword, and it easily becomes one of the most engaging features of the game. Unfortunately, overall the adventure is quite short, but to counteract this there are several modes which unlock upon completing the main adventure. If you're a fan of the manga, then this one will be right up your street. But for the casual hack and slash fans who may not know the source material, you'll still find a well polished and presented game to get stuck into. RPGs were a dime a dozen on the PlayStation 2, with heavy hitters like Final Fantasy to more obscure offerings like Rogue Galaxy. There was always plenty of choice for fans of the genre when it came to finding something new to play. One game that often got overlooked though was R. Tonelico, specifically its sequel, which saw it picking up just over a year after the events of the previous game. You take on the role of Crux, with the goal being to seek out a legend handed down by the people of the planet known as the Lost Hymn. Now the gameplay of R. Tonelico 2 is a strange beast. It's partly a turn-based RPG and partly an interactive novel. The two different parts of the game are brilliantly intertwined, with progress from one aspect helping with the other. Unlike the first game's purely turn-based system, R. Tonelico 2's battles have a rhythm element added to them. The battles themselves are divided into attack and defend phases. Attack phases consist of using your two main characters to launch different kinds of attacks, whereas defense sees you having to intercept the enemy's advance by hitting a bar at the right time in a sort of DDR fashion. This adds a real sense of urgency to each encounter and will manage to keep you on your toes as you come across increasingly difficult enemies. Now visually is where R. Tonelico 2 comes into its own. The 2D art style lends itself perfectly to each and every inhabitant of the world. From important story figures to lowly NPCs, the sprite work on display is exceptional, and it's pushed even further by some impressive backdrops that form the game's world. Overall, if you're looking for an intricate and challenging RPG, R. Tonelico 2 might not be your game, but if you prefer a more casual system or enjoyed the first game for that matter, then number 2 should suit you well. Demolition Girl is perhaps one of the most strangest PS2 games I've ever played. It follows the tradition of classic monster movies and sees a gigantic creature destroying the land. In this case, the creature being a massive Japanese woman in a bikini. During a beachside photo shoot, a pinup girl is bitten by an alien crab slash jellyfish, nobody knows what it is, and becomes this gigantic beauty. A creature capable of crushing buildings under her foot while skipping happily around Japan. You as the player are a National Guard pilot drafted in to first study and then capture the creature using any means necessary. The story plays out in a series of news reports, which are comically serious. No matter how insane the situation might get, the game plays it straight, which only adds to the quirky nature of the adventure. Now when it comes to gameplay, admittedly Demolition Girl is a bit of a mixed bag. In order to study and capture the creature, you take control of 3 different vehicles: a helicopter, fighter jet and a tank. The helicopter feels like a flying bathtub, with the jet being far too imprecise and the tank being the only one that feels comfortable to control. Unfortunately, you'll find yourself having to use the helicopter for most missions, but it is playable and just takes a while to get used to. There are only 6 missions in total, which include things like taking her titanic measurements for science apparently, and sending her to sleep using knockout missiles that look like giant syringes. With so few missions, the game can be completed in an afternoon, although a few unlockable costumes and difficulty settings do add to the replayability. Demolition Girl won't be for everyone, but if you're on the lookout for something completely different to give a go, it's well worth trying it out. If you're interested in me starting up a new series covering more strange games like this one in particular, let me know in the comments. Starting out life on the PC, it wasn't until 2002 that Tribes appeared on the PlayStation 2. At the time, online gaming was starting to find its footing, and Tribes would be one of the first games to help push the new initiative. If you're at all a fan of the Unreal Tournament games, you'll know exactly what to expect when jumping into Tribes. It supports up to 16 players in an arena at once, as well as online gameplay for 1 or 2 players simultaneously. Now, the most immediate noticeable difference between this and other first-person shooter games is that every character is equipped with a jetpack, allowing players to soar across the enormous levels and execute aerial assaults. The game offers several game types from the usual deathmatch, team deathmatch, capture the flag and king of the hill, but a new addition to the multiplayer mayhem was Hunter, which involved killing enemies and collecting the flags they drop, then returning them to a goal to score points. Another huge welcome to deathmatch is the inclusion of vehicles. As the player, you can access one of 4 vehicles from a designated platform at any time during the game, and can unleash enormous amounts of destruction on enemy bases. There are 4 vehicles, ranging from a dingo fighter that operates much like a fighter jet would, to a bomber or a transport ship that can carry 4 of your teammates across the map. The amount of options you can perform in Tribes is incredible, and it opens itself up to many different styles of play. If you're looking for a first-person shooter to jump into on the PlayStation 2, this is it. When it comes to fighting games, there's a bunch of established franchises, from Street Fighter to Mortal Kombat and Guilty Gear, but a lot of the lesser known fighters never get a chance to shine, and Melty Blood Actress Again is one of them. Starting out life on the PC, it wasn't until 2009 that the third iteration of the series would hit the PS2, but would ultimately never find its way west. The first thing I should mention is that this game is extremely English friendly. Navigating the menus and figuring out what means what is quite simple, so if you do fancy jumping into it, you don't have to worry about getting lost. Now, the action in the game is extremely fast paced. It's one of the fastest fighters I've ever played, and getting to know your character's moveset is vital to your success. This is a fighter that almost requires an arcade stick, because it's all about how quickly you can execute your attacks and string them together. By doing so, you fill up something known as the heat gauge a lot faster, which allows you to execute some of the more devastating special moves. As for the fighting itself, you can go into this and pull off super combos easily to start, but there is an amazing amount of depth to the game itself. Each character comes with a string of basic attacks, but unique individual specials that help them stand out from one another. Of course, it's not always about going on the offensive, and when the time calls to hand back, Melty Blood utilizes various guards and parries, as well as a countering system that can easily turn the tide of a fight in the blink of an eye. As with most fighting games, there are various modes to get stuck into, from the standard arcade option to training and versus mode, where a lot of the fun lies. If you're on the lookout for an enjoyable fighter that's easy to pick up and play but hard to master, Melty Blood Actress Again is a solid option. Rumble Racing is a sort of spiritual successor to NASCAR Rumble, which released on the PS1. Despite some changes, the game manages to maintain the essence of the original, all the while improving on nearly every aspect of the experience. The tracks themselves look very similar to those in the first game, and many of the power-ups you use to take out other drivers are the same as well, but this time the NASCAR affiliation is gone, and you instead race in souped-up street vehicles that are given funny names like the Banger or Tiberius. You'll find yourself racing on a combination of off-road and asphalt, with several shortcuts to be found and exploited that can really help out when you're trailing behind the pack. But perhaps what most distinguishes this game from its predecessor is the ability of the cars to perform stunts when they catch air. Doing stunts rewards you a nitro boost, which is one of the things that makes this game so much fun to play. A big part of succeeding is learning to keep your car under control during these boosts, which can be an absolute handful. These cars are also capable of firing all kinds of dangerous objects objects at each other, such as bombs, oil slick cans, rocks, and in rare cases a tornado, which adds an even more competitive edge to the gameplay. As you would expect, there's a ton of cars to unlock through completing the various championships that make up the main mode of play. Each of them have their own feel once out on the track, which lets the mayhem slowly ramp up as you unlock more faster and robust vehicles as you progress. If you're the kind of player that prefers a more arcadey approach to their racing games instead of the more realistic takes like Gran Turismo, Rumble Racing is a solid option. After the first game didn't make the impact that Volition were hoping it would, they went back to the drawing board and set out to right all of the wrongs of the first game with a sequel. Summoner 2 picks up 10 years after the events of the first game and introduces players to the Queen of Halasar, Maya, who serves as the main character. When it comes to gameplay, it's essentially an action RPG that sports many improvements to the systems introduced in the previous game. Of course, you've got your standard weapon-based attacks and magic skills, but what helps the combat stand out is the inclusion of summons, which allows you to transform into one of 4 powerful creatures, each with unique abilities and skills that can help the party in their quest. More importantly, the gameplay just feels faster, which was a huge issue with the first game. Fast-paced combat with an easier to manage combo system and special skill-based attacks, along with a huge selection of side quests to pursue, are all serious improvements. And even though the game is admittedly short, with all of the skills to learn and secrets to unlock, Summoner 2 is a real bang for your buck and will likely last you quite some time as you try to see everything the game has to offer. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 3 as that will be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials to stay up to date, as well as join our growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters Rhino, Skilljim, Nano, Steve, Richard, Amy, Daniel, Paul, Quinn, Dio, Alex, Pierre, Carl, Strider, and Paddy J for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're interested in joining my Discord or supporting the channel through Patreon to gain access to exclusive videos, monthly Q&As and giveaways for as little as $1 per month, you'll find the links in the description. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch the video. I'll catch you next time.